All right, we are live on Facebook. And we'll just give it another minute or two. Give another minute or two for people to arrive, and then we'll get started. Thanks everybody for coming on this Monday.
Be here.
I'm just entertained by the kids. I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the pregame show.
I think that's really the best part of Zoom is the kids and the pets.
Yeah. Brad, you and I have teenagers. It's not as much fun on Zoom anymore. So.
Yeah, not for them either, but
No.
I mean, the time I was interviewing, my daughter ran up and said, "Daddy, I have to pee." Was not ideal, but
Yeah.
you know, everybody understood.
very humanizing. Yeah.
There's going to be
yeah.
a great film, just like all the Zoom outtakes, you know, the pandemic Zoom outtakes of everything you were not supposed to see. But it's nice. It humanizes everyone.
Yeah, totally agree.
And you get to see very cute kids.
All right, why don't we go ahead and get started. Again, I want to welcome everybody. My name is Doug Schneider, and I am the Democratic District Leader for the 44th Assembly District. We're going to start. I'm going to hand it over to our Councilmember Brad Lander, for his opening remarks. Brad Lander is a member of the New York City Council for the 39th Council District here in Brooklyn. He serves as the Council's Deputy Leader for Policy and was a co-founder of the Council's Progressive Caucus. Brad, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Doug, for convening this. Obviously, it's just so important and also quite timely panel on the state of Brooklyn small businesses, you know, to some extent what the New American Rescue Plan can mean, but more, where are we? And, you know, I think we talk a lot, you know, our small businesses in New York City are something that unite us actually across the political spectrum. There's a sort of kind of everyone loves small business character, and we talk about all the jobs they create, but you know, I don't think we really honestly have appreciated what they mean to us. And, you know, it's just the horrific nature of the pandemic that it has, you know, like so many things, shined this spotlight on, you know, how hard it is for small business owners. And that was true well before the pandemic. And I'll talk about that in 1 minute. But, you know, just to have our neighborhoods bereft of what bring them their energy and life, you know, it's devastating. And so the number of businesses that have closed, the number, which is, you know, the I guess Brooklyn Chamber has new data out. It's basically 85% of Brooklyn small businesses had to lay folks off. 80% saw significant revenue declines. Over half are behind in rent. Most have not seen landlords who have been willing to negotiate some reasonable thing with them. There's new relief coming, and yet most people, so many have not been able to secure meaningful PPP relief, or it didn't go far enough, or it had rules that made it hard for people to access. So just whatever statistic you pick, whichever angle on the story you look at, it's been devastating. And we all know that just from walking around and kind of seeing what's going on in our neighborhoods. I will say, against that, it has been so hopeful to start to see some new businesses open up. I don't know about you, but I've had a chance now to go into, you know, there's a new coffee shop around the corner from my house. And, you know, one of the panelists that was hoping to be on here, Pasta Louise, a brand new business that opened during the pandemic. I went yesterday to a pupusa restaurant. This was in Queens. I was out there, that opened during the pandemic. And you just feel the kind of energy that we are going to need to get to the other side of this. The fact that people are still willing, despite all the challenges, despite the fact that they've poured their savings and their energy and their blood, sweat, and tears to start it, to try again, to keep going, is exactly the kind of hopeful energy that the spring is bringing, that our neighborhoods need, that the open streets and open restaurants promise. But I guess I just want to end with this as I hand it back to you, Doug, is I think we need to be clear, you know, and this is one of the places where it's not just the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic, devastated revenue people could earn. But the rent pressures on our Brooklyn small businesses especially were here long before the COVID crisis. The fact that you don't have any stability knowing, like you do if you're, fortunate enough to be a rent stabilized tenant, that next year the rent's only going to go up a little bit so you can afford to invest because you know what's coming in the future, and skyrocketing and unpredictable rents, along with a range of other things that make it challenging to do business. We need to show up in ways that both support and save our small businesses and that build stronger, better public policy for the future. So that's why I offered this idea of small business recovery leases to try to build some long-term rent stability. It's why I'm a supporter of commercial rent stabilization as a way of giving people long-term stability. But what we need right now is a thoughtful policy dialogue. How do we support and save our small businesses to help them come back and thrive and drive a really energetic recovery? And what kinds of new public policies, if we want to keep neighborhoods like the ones we have and not have them turned into strip malls with chain stores or have Amazon deliver everything to us. If we want to keep a city with small businesses, with neighborhoods like the ones we have, with jobs in them, then we need to show up with some new public policies. So that's why I think this is a great time to convene the conversation. And I was honored, Doug, that you invited me and thrilled to be participating tonight.
Thank you so much, Council Member. And I really appreciate your comments and your commitment to helping our small businesses. I am, in addition to being the Democratic District Leader, I've a small business owner myself, owning a solo practice law firm. And as an attorney, I have represented small businesses throughout Brooklyn, including businesses in Park Slope, like Slope Cellars, Krupa Grocery, 7th Avenue Wines and Liquors. And echoing, what Councilmember Lander said, small businesses are the driving force of New York City's economy, and they're also, the lifeblood of our communities. Our neighborhoods are often, their character comes, from the small businesses, and so our food culture, is a major driver of the tourism industry. Right? People come from all over the world to New York City specifically to eat and drink at bars and restaurants, throughout the 5 boroughs. Think about, a place like Peter Luger's, right? In movies and TV. And so, we know that these businesses have all been devastated by COVID-19, and that without government and community support, many will not be able to survive. And, as Councilmember Lander just said, at the same time, COVID-19 has really exacerbated pre-pandemic challenges that small businesses in the city have faced. Again, things such as commercial rent and the escalating cost of commercial rent, and then also things like our fines and fees-based, regulatory enforcement. And so, fortunately, there is some help on the way with the American Rescue Plan that was passed and signed into law last week. And, the American Rescue Plan will provide tens of billions of dollars to help restaurants and other small businesses survive, including $28.6 billion Restaurant Revitalization Fund. And it also provides much needed assistance for displaced workers. But it doesn't solve it, alone. We also need innovative policies and bold leadership to help small businesses not just survive, but thrive. And so we are lucky tonight to be joined by a panel of successful restaurant owners and unique restaurants to talk about kind of the unique challenges that they faced during COVID. And as well, we have small business leaders and industry leaders to talk about how government can assist and what resources exist to help them. After we hear from each of the panelists, feel free to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A function, and I will sort through them as we go along, and we can pose them to our panelists afterwards, after we hear from them. So to begin, I will just give a brief introduction of each of them. First, we have Ivy Mix, who is a world-renowned mixologist and a co-owner of the James Beard Award-nominated Leyenda Cocktail Bar and Restaurant. She is also the co-founder of Speed Rack, an all-female high-speed bartending competition that gives female bartenders a space to be showcased while also raising money for breast cancer. We have Mark Caserta, who has been the executive director of the Fifth Avenue Business Improvement District since 2013. The Park Slope Fifth Avenue BID is a nonprofit that serves more than 500 merchants, 400 landlords, and 50,000 nearby residents. We have Dana Morrissey and Ronny Jaramillo and guests and family who are decade-long restaurant industry veterans and owners of two great Park Slope restaurants, Bar Crudo and Chela. We have finally Andrew Rigie, who is the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, which is an association representing restaurants and nightlife venues throughout the 5 boroughs. It is considered a premier organization delivering information, education, services, and representing thousands of New York City restaurants and nightlife venues. In addition to that, among his many other roles, he is also the chair of the New York City Office of Nightlife Advisory Board. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ivy Mix. Thank you, Ivy, for being here.
Hi, yeah, I'm really happy to be here. So I think, to start off, I just want to talk a little bit about my experiences with COVID. So my bar and restaurant, Leyenda, we're just on Smith Street between Baltic and Butler. And we celebrated our 5-year anniversary in May in the thick of it, in the thick of COVID. We decided to shut down the Sunday before, so 1 or 2 days before Cuomo actually called it. We kind of saw the writing on the wall, and a lot of not just people who work in my restaurant, but people who work in all sorts of restaurants are traveling the city over to get to and from. Most people are not working and living in the neighborhoods that they are not living in the neighborhoods that they work in. So we didn't want to put anyone at risk, so we shut down. I thought that was going to be for like a few days. Went to Vermont, where I'm born and raised in Vermont. Went home for what I thought was 2 weeks. I was there for 2.5 months. One by one, I saw people in my community and my staff get sick, and watched my business dwindle down to just no sales, obviously no sales. And it was really depressing and very upsetting. And we had zero money coming in and all of the money coming out. If you run a business, you know what it's like when your water bill comes. Anyway, that just happened to happen during that time, which was like, oh, great, this too. And it was very tough. I became a member of the Independent Restaurant Coalition, and we're the group that kind of like really pushed for the Restaurant Revitalization or the Restaurants Act. And I'm really happy that that's coming. I think a lot of the things that you hit on, Doug, are really important. Like, I think that we can come back from COVID and actually be better than we were, not worse, in many, many different ways, with things like, why can we not tip out our back of house? Like, why in New York City is that something we cannot do? It's very weird. We should be able to do that. I think that, what you said earlier about, we have this like regulatory system where you get fined like crazy and is really detrimental to the way businesses survive. Like right now, anything that we get, any fine is like another nail in the coffin. And I'm really interested to see and be part of the conversation about how we can give people the tools to succeed rather than the detriments to fail. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Ivy. So now we'll hear from Mark Caserta about some of the stuff going on locally here in Park Slope. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Well, we have a mix. I think what Brad described is basically what's happening on Fifth Avenue. That's the microcosm. We have lost quite a few businesses since COVID started. on the upside, we've actually gained more businesses than we've lost in this past year. That doesn't mean that the businesses who are currently in business are not in a lot of pain and trying to figure out how to stay open. But it does mean that entrepreneurs are entrepreneuring and trying new things and opening, and we're happy for that. We're trying to work daily with our stores and bars and restaurants, trying to help them navigate everything, find the resources they need. We are taking calls and emails from businesses that are in Manhattan sometimes. We have basically opened up our help to whoever calls us or whoever emails us or messages us on Instagram gets help. That's the policy. And when we need some further expertise, we send people to organizations like the New York City Small Business Recovery Network, which is a great resource. We implemented last July Open Streets Restaurants as a way to help restaurants. The restaurants actually asked me first before all the program even happened. I got requests from restaurants asking me, hey, can we, in Europe, they dine outside. Why can't we do this thing? And there was no framework to do that at the time. It was like April of last year. And I asked them, can you go door to door and ask your neighbors, would you support such a thing? And put together a proposal, and I'll just hold it next to my computer. And as soon as they say we can do this, I'll send it off to people who are running it. And that's exactly what happened. And we were able to, last year, close 19 blocks. I think by the time the summer hits, we'll probably be at 20. And I think it's done very well for the neighborhood and for the restaurants. And the only downside is the city doesn't really provide us with any resources except for broken barricades. So we are currently raising money to run our own program right now. We actually had to buy a bunch of barricades to close Ronnie's blocks last year. So it's kind of a labor of love. But the good news is, I will give you some good news. The community, we put it out there to the restaurants and the community and sponsors and asked, hey, this is a great program. If you love it, we need to raise about $50,000. And as of today, we've raised $42,000 in 2 weeks. So obviously people like the program, and we're going to move ahead. So that's it.
Doug, can I just jump in to keep a little praise on Mark before we go on here? Because everyone on this panel deserves our enormous gratitude and for all they're doing. But I do think the people, this weekend, because it was the first one that Fifth Avenue was closed again after the winter, and I heard from so many people excited, did you see Fifth Avenue is closed again? It's back to that. The enthusiasm in the air. And I don't think people know what Mark just said about how much work they're doing. It's not by magic that the streets are getting closed, and it's not because the city of New York is providing, any work or sending anyone with the barricades. Mark's team is doing all that work. They've got they're raising, from supporters for it, but they didn't get any public support. That is a labor of love, and so many people are benefiting from it in just an extraordinary way. The businesses and the customers, but really just what it brings to the neighborhood is extraordinary. So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to continue. We're going to expand, and if we raise enough, we're going to have the summer. We're going to go to Sundays as well. So
that's great. That's great. I am going to hand it over to Dana and Rudy and guest now.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Ronnie. So,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh God, sorry, Ronnie. I don't know.
The whole time I was telling Dana, I should have changed.
Oh my God.
That sounds good.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So
I thought that was the baby's name.
Yeah. One of my guys started crying, so sorry about that. Well, we own Bar Crudo and Chela, and unfortunately, the one of the Bar Crudo, it was literally just open only a couple of months when the pandemic happened. Because of it and the guidelines of the PPP loans, it was very hard for us to actually get approved for it, unfortunately. So Bar Crudo is an oyster bar, and how do you start an oyster bar in the middle of a pandemic? That's why I'm very proud of being on the block of Fifth Avenue, because Mark has done a great job with the open street program, because it allows us to have in the beginning or curbside. We were serving oysters curbside, and we're serving shrimp cocktails, and it was I've never been in a vision of a reactionary of reaction to what's happening. I've always tried to be ahead of the game, and this definitely put us in a position of we have no choice, only that just to observe and react. We had no other help, or rent kept piling up, or bills kept piling up. We kept facing the choice whether we should give up or keep going. And professionally, we chose to keep going because we had a conversation in this same kitchen that we're talking to you right now with my wife Dana and I, and we were like, it's not just our family, it's the family of everybody that works with us that chose to stay and chose to keep going, keep pushing, and against our accountants and attorneys' advice, we said we have to keep going. We keep going, and that was pretty much the vision and the attitude. Because once again, I mean, my landlord kept acting like the virus didn't exist. The bills kept coming. There was no flexibility. There's no, okay, so you're 25 down to 25% capacity. That means that your bills are going to be 25%. That just didn't work. So we have been left out of and kind of like on our own devices, right?
Well, and the bills actually, they get higher because there's all these unfunded mandates of new things that we have to do for COVID regulations. I mean, they came in November or December, and we're busting our chops about our air conditioning units and some new upgrade. And we're like, we're at 25% capacity looking at shutdown, and you want us to do a $10,000 upgrade on our air conditioning, and they're like, well, figure it out. We'll come back in a week's time. And there's just the extra sanitation, and you actually do need more staff to make it safe, to make it COVID safe. And it's just like, where is that money coming from? We can't just keep passing it on to the consumer, because they're tapped out too. They're trying to support us, but they're not going to go for $40 plate of tacos to.
Yeah, 100%. And just to follow up something that Ivy said about the fines and the fees and all of these things. Only a few weeks ago, right after we opened up again, after being shut down for the second time, we got visited by every single agency. And I'm like, wait a second, what everybody, just like one after another. It's
Same.
Like,
I also.
1,000, another 1,000, 25. I'm like, wait a second, like what's going on? And like all of us, it was so aggressively. And I wish it was at least a breathing room. I'm like, we just opened up a week ago. And if there was some kind of program that actually, and when I asked, because I complained and I said, why is everybody all of a sudden aggressively checking us? I felt attacked, like it was happening just to me. And they said, well, we don't talk to each other. I don't know when the health department comes in. I don't know when the fire marshal comes in. The agencies don't talk to each other, and if there was some kind of system or something, or a program, or if you have to pay all this fine all of a sudden, it's just like, I mean, means something. We need something to happen. It's insane. So Ivy, I know exactly what you're talking about because it happened to me only a week after we reopened.
Yeah, same thing happened to me. And then frequently I had the fire department come in every other day for 2 weeks, and they never communicated anything within that one department. And I was just like, y'all have to figure this out.
I don't know how much time do I have, but I'll tell you a very quick story. When we were building the little house outside that we have to seat people on the roadside program, and I had the DOT checking me in the morning on a Sunday morning, and I had the building department check me in the afternoon. And because it was not up to the qualifications of like where they were requesting at the time, because it changed every single week when that happened, that representative said to me, if you don't fix it in the next hour or so, you will have to bring, I'm gonna bring a garbage truck and take it all up. I'm like, wait a second, what? I'm sorry, what? I'm like, it's a Sunday. I remember it was one of those weird Sundays with a nice weather that we're seeing people all the time. This is all I have. What about giving me a warning and tell me, you know what? You have until like a couple of days. I mean, it kept changing every other day, the guidelines of how that thing was supposed to be built. And those things, it's been very frustrating because the lack of communication between agency, the lack of support, the lack of understanding, the lack of flexibility. How are we going to be paying all this fine and all these bills that are already piled up? Right? There is just so much to work on, so much to work for, so much that we've been going through, so much that we are willing. We decided this is what we're doing. We're going to go through, we're going to win at the end of the day. But how that road is going to look like, how many bumps do we have to go through? How many walls do we have to break? Do they have to be that hard? Right?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, Ronnie, sorry about that. Rudy Jaramillo is a longtime baseball coach. He's a Major League Baseball coach, so I apologize for that. But it's absolutely maddening to hear what you and Ivy are saying. I have some friends who own restaurants who aren't on the panel today, including my friend Rafi Hassid, who talks about how much money they spent to build, to go outdoors, only to build to the regulations that were announced, only to have to do the entire thing over in less than a week because they changed the rules. Yep. And Brad, I don't know if you will remember this, but it was a really striking moment years ago during Seventh Heaven. One of our restaurants was out. They set up outside to serve food, right? Doing the community a favor. And the Department of Health was there writing tickets for something or other. And it was stunning to me that would happen at that time. And so I think a lot of these things.
We always used to be so proud that we got so many local businesses to participate in the 5th Avenue and 7th Avenue street fairs until we realized that largely what we were doing was helping them get tickets written, because the permit that you need, even if you have the restaurant, the permit that you need to offer food to your neighbors at the street fair in front of your store is, is very, a challenge to get. So.
We are lucky because we have the next person to speak has the answers to all of these problems, right, Andrew? So I'll hand it over to you.
I don't have answers, but something. But thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. I mean, these are the exact types of conversations that you constantly have when you speak with small business owners throughout the city. And I think what Ivy said, or at least implied earlier, about how do we come out of this on a stronger footing, I think that's critically important. On a lot of these Zooms, I always say the old Winston Churchill quote, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste." And I think we need to use this as an opportunity to fix a lot of these issues that frankly were problems pre-pandemic, our industry was struggling with. I do want to touch on some of the details of the restaurant relief that was provided, but then happy to chat about some of the additional issues that were brought up here, because I can hit on a few points that may be helpful to people. So finally, after a year, I guess better late than never, but it's incredibly important. In this round of stimulus, the $1.9 billion package, $28.6 billion has been earmarked for a specific restaurant relief fund. Essentially, restaurants will get the difference between their 2019 and 2020 revenues as a grant. So it's not like the PPP, which is a loan that's only converted into a grant if specific requirements are met. Those requirements being very difficult for restaurants to meet under the PPP because it was tied to payroll. And when you are shut down or your operations are severely limited, keeping all the payroll in order to have it convert into a grant didn't really work. So this is grants for rent, payroll, vendor expenses. Let's not forget, it's not just the restaurant owners and workers that are struggling, but think about the farmers and all the vendors that sell the products and services to our industry. They're down and out because we're down and out. So it can really help from the ground up, support the economy, get places, get restaurants back up, paying off some debt, and hopefully making it to the end of the light at the tunnel. I think there's a little bit of light. It's a little bit of a glimpse, let's say, and it looks like it's not a train that's coming head on. With the warmer weather coming, more outdoor dining. Mark does an incredible job over there with the team. But I think we need to use this opportunity to fix issues. Two things: the state budget is being worked on. Both budgets proposed by the Assembly and the Senate include about $1 billion for small businesses. Half of it's in grants, the other half would help with commercial rent relief. I think rent relief is going to be the most important issue because it's the largest fixed cost for restaurants and most small businesses. Labor being the highest, which is the variable cost, but that's when you're open fully and operating. So this money, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, a program will be set up. Part of the monies are allocated for female-owned, veteran-owned restaurants. There's also set-asides for specific types of businesses that have been hit the hardest for different economic and socioeconomic reasons. And we're really just hoping the money will be out the door as soon as possible. Some people continue to ask, well, the original Restaurants Act bill was $120 billion. Is $28.6 billion going to be enough? Who knows at this point? What I will say is that everyone should just speak with their accountants, whoever does their books, and just be prepared for the federal government to release the application and the details of what information like tax returns and other expenses you'll have to submit. So just be ready as soon as that information is available. The New York City Hospitality Alliance, and I'm sure countless other organizations like the IRC will be hosting seminars and sending out information. So I would just say be prepared. If that money is exhausted, we've spoken with Senator Schumer and others multiple times. They are committed to re-upping that funding if needed. You may recall the Paycheck Protection Program, when it was first launched, it was exhausted, and then more money was added to the pot. So we'll see what happens there. About a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the City Council held, and I'll transition quickly, City Council held a hearing on several pieces of legislation. One bill would basically look at all the fines and violations that are issued to small businesses, and those violations that don't pose an immediate hazard to the public, to workers, would allow for a cure period or a warning before a fine is just issued. This is something we've been advocating for years. The way it should work is an inspector comes in, they point out a violation, they explain why it's a violation, how to correct that violation, and then they give you an amount of time to correct it. And if they come back and you haven't corrected it, well, then you would be issued a violation. But we think it would also change the dynamic between the restaurants and the inspectors, because inspectors wouldn't feel pressure to walk in and issue fines because they don't want to go back to the office empty-handed, and they could focus more on education, training, and compliance as a first resort. So that's going to be really important. The outdoor dining, we are working on the process to create that into a permanent program. It'll be a little bit different than what currently exists, but that's really another positive step, we believe. And what Ivy said as well earlier, when it comes to, I have my home chef. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. So we also have, we're pushing bills that would allow tips to be shared with back of house workers. I think one of the issues coming out of this is how do we create a more fair, equitable, and supportive regulatory environment for restaurants and all other small businesses. And one of the challenges for people that don't know is tipped workers obviously earn tips, but kitchen workers, what we call back of house, people in the kitchen, are unable to earn part of those tips, even though the work they do has a direct impact on the experience of the guest. And we think that it would create more fairness, more equity within the workplace, and increase the wages of back of house workers compared to front of house workers whose wages have continued to go up and up and up. Now that's fine, but it would be nice to have a little bit more equity there and change that rule. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. It's been an incredibly trying year. Like I've been saying, I have no doubt New York City's restaurant nightlife industry will come back. I think we're going to have a restaurant renaissance and a roaring 20s, and people won't be able to get out and eat and drink and socialize. But the real question is, how do we help save as many of these restaurants that were operating before and during the pandemic so they have an opportunity to enjoy that future? And when we get to that future, we need to make sure that we rid them of all this, debt from missed rent and vendor expenses, and give them the strongest footing to come out of this.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you, everybody. I'm gonna take the organizer privilege of asking the first question, and I will also just point out, if anybody's been watching Dana, while we talk about trying to figure out how to help our businesses survive, she managed to get a baby to sleep, which is, for any parent who knows, a very impressive feat. But Andrew, you mentioned that the state budget has money for commercial rent relief, which I imagine is a temporary relief package. There is obviously, everybody's talked about commercial rent and the escalating commercial rent and the problems that imposes for most small businesses. Of the various ways to address that, especially with the pushback that you obviously get from a lot of people who are landlord industry and real estate, what's the best approach? What is the best way to address the commercial rent? And I can even throw in the vacant storefronts that are associated with it or a result of it. You're on mute.
Yeah, good. I mean, that's a question we could just talk an hour about. I'm hoping that there will be some natural market correction in the commercial real estate market, related to this pandemic. There'll be more fully built out restaurant and bar spots available, and, landlords will want to fill it. But there's other conversations, do you do a vacancy tax? There's things like the Small Jobs sort of Protection Act and several other bills, commercial rent stabilization or rent control. And you can get into the weeds and start really debating each one of those issues. And I think they have, there's pros and cons to all of them. But I think at the end of the day, what we need to do is, one, deal with the rent crisis. We conducted a study recently. It found in the month of December, more than 90% of restaurants were unable to pay their full rent. And that was a survey of more than 400 restaurants and bars. So I think first deal with the initial crisis. Then there's other issues as well that you even hear from landlords. If they reduce their rents, they could be in violation of some provision in their mortgage agreements. You also have to understand, if people own multiple properties and they start reducing the rent, it devalues the amount of their portfolio, which is their issue. And that may be the reality of today's environment. But I think there's some technical legal issues that need to be at hand. But I'll also, put government on the hook too with property taxes. I was on a call yesterday, and one of the things the restaurateur, several of them said, is that over the past, 5-10 years, the amount of property taxes that they pay as a pass through in their commercial lease have continued to skyrocket. And they've been even more challenging than the actual rents. Now, I understand we need to raise money to fund all of our essential services, but this seems like another way that it's being raised on the backs of small business owners. So perhaps there's a way to offset those property taxes to help them too.
Thank you for that, Andrew. I want to see if any of our panelists have questions that they want to ask Ivy, Brad, Ronny, Dana, of Mark or Andrew, of each other.
Yeah, I have some questions. I mean, one of the things that, and someone put it in the chat here, but I want to know what we're doing going forward. I think it's really interesting that we're going to 50%, like half the stuff that happens, I've realized now, of like being involved with the Independent Restaurant Coalition and the New York Hospitality Coalition, is that a lot of these statements and press releases come out and they're just kind of lip service. They don't mean anything. Like in New York City, 50% occupancy, it cannot be 6 feet spaced apart. It's just impossible. Like, tell me the restaurant who can do that. So when do we get to not do that? And when do we, and that's thing number one. Thing number two is like, when the thing that's so frustrating about being a restaurant owner is that the communication has been so botched from top to bottom, from the presidency to the governor to the mayor. Like, it's just been like, no one knows what's going on. Things change every other day, as we've said. Are we going to have more advance notice? Because if there's a day that's like, hey, in a month, you don't have to, 50% is, without 6 feet, then people are going to be able to save thousands of dollars not building partitions, So I don't know, that's more of a statement than a comment, but like, who's going to help us plan? Because time is money and wasted time is hugely bad. And then someone put in the chat too, Mark, let's get Smith Street open. I know it's impossible because it's like a 3-way to the bridges, but like, if you need a proponent, I'm down.
Well, I'm going to pitch in on that last part because I mean, the reason that the Park Slope Fifth Avenue bid is able to open Fifth Avenue is because people did like really hard work, even beyond opening their businesses, to create the Park Slope Fifth Avenue Business Improvement District. There are an amazing group of people working to create a Smith or a Smith Court bid, and they've been trying it for years. And it really speaks to, look, it would be better if the city found ways, because look, in low-income communities, it's a lot harder for folks to have anything like what the Park Slope Fifth Avenue bid is. The city ought to provide more support to make it possible for people. Like, it's a little crazy that the way you have access to something like that is if folks are willing not only to just tax themselves a little higher, right, which is what a bid is, but do all the organizing work for no compensation to create an organization through which they'll tax themselves a little higher. So I think, and you see this with other aspects of the Open Streets program as well, those that have worked well are the ones where neighbors have the capacity, can find a way to take the time to do the organizing, to be stewards of that open space. And we don't really have a good program in place to help people do that. It's very catch as catch can, and you get super lucky like we did on Fifth Avenue or they are on Vanderbilt, but it's pretty random where that works and doesn't work. And I mean, to your point, I think obviously the failures at the federal, state, and local level to coordinate with each other, to provide clear messaging, to be able to get together around policies. These have been hard issues, and they were going to be hard issues under the best of circumstances, because keeping people safe and having the right public health policies did mean devastating our economy. Like, that was just but we could have done it in a way that where everybody was together across the levels of government, where people showed their work and were clear what decisions that they were making, and at least let people feel like they understood what was going on. And it wasn't just like either a giant political football or, just total incompetence. And, unfortunately, we're stuck here. I will say, I'm at this point relatively optimistic. At the beginning of vaccine distribution, I was super stressed out about how it was going. It is going a lot better. That is largely because the federal government got its act together. But in this case, city and state are also doing pretty good vaccine distribution. The real answer here is not 6 feet versus 3 feet, or 50% versus 25% or 75%. The answer is vaccine distribution that lets us open our businesses back up just as quickly as we possibly can get really broad vaccine distribution.
We've just gotten some really great questions coming in the Q&A, so I want to get an opportunity to ask some of these. And so the first one that I will ask comes from Bob Lenartz, who is the owner of Krupa Grocery here in Windsor Terrace. And he asked a really great question, which is, will the outdoor dining room that he wants to build on a very expensive Prospect Park West be allowed a year from now? Or is the amount that he spends on that going to be, a temporary thing?
I guess probably Andrew and I should both give our sense to this. Andrew, you start.
Yeah, thanks. So the outdoor dining program is going to be made permanent. The current program, though, is temporary and runs, I believe, until October. Between now and October, the city is supposed to develop the permanent program. So whatever you have now, do not count on that being the same specifications as what is going to be required. So I would not recommend, unless you've run all the numbers and it makes sense, to invest in a whole outdoor dining setup now, because after October, it will likely have to be taken down and or modified to meet the new requirements. And those new requirements will require an application process. It'll probably be different from the current program, which is just self-certification. And so, yeah, so the long and short of it is the program will be permanent, but the current requirements, both for the sidewalk and the roadway, will change. So before you invest too much money, I would wait until then, so you can hopefully build something once and for all and not have it have to change.
I have my fingers crossed that we're not going to find out what those rules are in September. So,
Yeah, right.
because that's how things have been working lately. Just sudden radical changes, like just weeks before they're due. So,
Well, Mark, that's one thing that I would just say, and it goes back to what Ivy was saying as well, is, the one thing that has been certain throughout this whole pandemic essentially is that everything is uncertain. But jokes aside, there really have been one or two areas, or maybe a few more, that are a little bit more certain, where government could have provided more guidance and didn't. And it just compounded the challenges. So I think it's really incumbent of government, even if something is uncertain and is subject to change, to at least provide the best information that they have at the time, with the caveat that needs to be front and center that this is going to change, because people have to plan, with all these different issues. People are like, do I continue to exhaust my personal savings to keep my business open? Or do I just turn in the key and, cut my losses? And it's incredibly difficult to make those types of decisions when you're being provided no information at all. So when it comes to the opening requirements, Councilman's completely correct. The answer to this is getting vaccines widely into people's arms. Hopefully we're past, what has to happen for us to get to 75%, to 85%, to remove the barriers. But the reality is, even with that stuff, it would have been extremely helpful to know these metrics have to occur in order for us to increase occupancy. XYZ has to occur in order for this to happen. And so often that guidance wasn't provided. So small business owners were
or even when it does, look, the governor at the beginning provided a whole bunch of data and said these factors will be what determines your level of opening. And that just got thrown aside when he decided it was of no more use to him.
And that changed, exactly. So at first we had basically a detailed system in place, but then after that, it was just off the railroad. And
now one of the things that Ivy said was and I think we all know about this, is the siloing of city agencies and not talking to one another. And if there's anyone who's thinking of running for mayor or running for mayor and watching this, keep in mind that does have to be fixed. And one thing I'm really appreciative of as a bid director, Department of Small Business Services has been bringing us together on a weekly basis. Andrew, I think you were on one of those weekly calls, and we get to have real-time feedback with agencies that we're having difficulties with, or there are policy changes with, and we're giving reports from the ground to them. And I think that's a great way to break through that sort of siloing. So I'd love to see that happening more in the future.
Thank you. There's a question that I'm going to tweak a little bit from Regina Shafir. She says, we're not a restaurant, but we're an entertainment business in Park Slope, and an escape room. She wants to know about the bureaucratic maze and how to navigate it, but I'm going to tweak the question more general, which is, it's great that we have open streets, for restaurants, but open streets for restaurants isn't going to help if you are, for example, escape room, or if you sell scented candles or paper. And so what can we do, what is being done to kind of expand those same lifelines to non-restaurant, non-hospitality based businesses?
So you can use, if you're on an open streets area, you can apply for the Open Storefronts program, which runs exactly like open restaurants, and then you get approved on the site, and then given a set of regulations you have to follow. I know it is difficult to do. You're setting up in front of your store. You do need staff and other things. And so right now, only about 600 to 700 businesses are currently taking advantage of it. But if you are on an open streets restaurants avenue, you can also come out and put a tent in the street and sell there legally. So that is something. I would certainly, I think we would love to see the stores that are really struggling, if they really want that space in front of them in the parking space. I don't think everyone's going to take advantage of it, but if they want it, they should be able to apply for that as well, like a restaurant.
Great. So Judith Leaf asks a question of a slightly different vein, which is, open streets are great, but she was at a restaurant the other day where, people were out eating and drinking, so masks are off, and there was a lot of music playing and people congregating and having fun and talking, which we know a lot of those things are the biggest spreaders, events. So what is the fine line, and what can we do to keep everyone safe while also enjoying the open streets?
Well, I can answer for us. I mean, I'm aware of the situation. One of the things that that particular place was violating was they were blocking, the band was causing a blockage in the middle of the street. So we were going to talk to them about kind of roping their area off. What I can't easily change is crowding. That's something that's not easily solved, certainly not from the bid. We can talk to people after the fact, but with the pressure of rent relief and all these other things, it's very easy to take the customers and have them outside and make up for all the lost revenue. So I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in on it, but it's a difficult balance.
Yeah, I would just say, I hope, we have to put in perspective the open restaurants, the open retail, and just the open streets and everything else that's going on. I mean, I hate saying unprecedented, but this is an unprecedented situation. And I think everyone was scrambling to figure out what to do and how to address this. But the one thing that we have learned, and it goes back to don't let a good crisis go to waste, is we've seen how the community and different neighborhoods have embraced open streets and all of these different uses. And I think it sends a signal to all of our lawmakers that we need to reimagine how we use our public space to engage the public in all different ways, be it restaurants or retail or just riding bikes with your kids or just sitting out and playing cards. And because this was all stood up in the midst of a pandemic with everything's changing, I think there's certainly in retrospect areas that you would fix or improve to address crowding, to address all these other issues that have come up. But now we have the opportunity to say we are going to be on the other side of this pandemic. And what do we want our sidewalks, our streets, our public spaces to look like? And let's reimagine it, and let's do it in a way that allows for different people to use public space in different ways where they're able to interact with each other, but also give each other enough space. And I think if we have the political will to do it, we can create a place where you're not going to have so much crowding on the sidewalks. You can have bike lanes, you can have areas for people to sit, but it all comes down to organizing and working at all levels of government to do it in an efficient and smart way, in a way that does not create more challenges. Because the last thing that we want to see, at least I want to see coming out of this, is like we create a great new open restaurants program, but then all of a sudden the restaurants apply and it's confusing and there's bureaucracy and red tape. And then they finally get it set up, and then an inspector from DOB gives them a violation for this. And then Consumer Affairs comes out and gives them a violation for that. So I think we can smartly rebuild our outdoor areas. But we just need feedback from all different people in the community about how the space is going to be used.
Thank you. We take one more question from the Q&A, and Lisa Albin asks, will the New York State Minority and Women-Owned Business Program get involved to try to offer incentives for women and minority business owners who are vendors to the city and or state? So I'll expand it to say New York State or New York City. Will they be doing work to try to offer incentives for women and minority business owners who are vendors to the city or state?
This is an area where the answer is like there are a lot of efforts underway, and they're still nowhere near good enough. The city has done meaningful work to try to get minority and women-owned businesses prioritized to be vendors when the city is contracting. And yet, if you look at the data, it is appalling. It's like, it's over 75% of contracts. I think it's, even over 80% of contracts go to white men. And then, when you look at it break down, and if you're really asking, especially for Black and Latino communities, business owners, how much of city business goes to them, it is appallingly small. And there's just so much more work we have to do. So I think it's a great question. It's something I'm thinking a lot about these days. I'll be glad to talk more to folks about what we could do, hear ideas. There are efforts to put more capital out there, efforts to get the city to pay its contracts faster, because you can't float the city for a year if you're a small new startup business, to do more subcontracting, to give people opportunities. But it is an area where we have a long way to go. And coming out of COVID is going to be a really critical time to do it.
So I lied. I'm going to ask one more question because I think it's a really great question. Since a lot of our people here are, they rely on the bar part of the business as well as the food part of the business. And so Maria Ross asks, when will we be allowed to have later hours and later bar service?
Hi, Maria. Who knows? Hopefully soon. We got the 11 p.m. put back from 10 p.m. I think hopefully there'll be a chance to get to midnight, sooner than later. Also, sitting at bars, obviously that's been a huge challenge, and that actually it deals with part of the occupancy issue, because you don't have that much space, and if you can't even sit people up at bars, you lose more space. So we still don't know exactly. These things tend to move quickly, but I suspect if the numbers, being the infection rates and the hospitalization rates, continue to trek downwards, hopefully sooner than later. But the main point is, I think, the President Biden said May 1st, all states should be able to vaccinate any adult that wants one. So hopefully by the spring, at some point, whether that's May or June, we'll have most of those restrictions lessened and hopefully eliminated shortly thereafter, if not then.
Thank you. And I think we will start to wrap up now. And so I want to thank everybody for coming. I do want to say, Mark, Andrew, if you were able to put your information that people can contact you in the chat, that way, if any of our panelists have more questions about any of the stuff we talked about or didn't get to today, they can reach out to you. I want to thank Ivy and Dana and Ronnie for being here. I for one will definitely be coming to each of your restaurants shortly. And so I know it's been really hard, and thank you so much for being here and for your advocacy. And of course, Andrew and Mark, keep up the good work, keep up the fight. It is great to have you out here advocating for our small businesses, our restaurants, our bars, our unique culture throughout New York City. So thank you everybody for coming, and be good out there and stay safe and stay healthy and get your vaccine.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.